Thank you. It's an honor to be here and love to share my experience to your audience, to the world, like you said. And so a little bit about my background first. So I started in IT 30 years ago, and I was just a cable puller, but I was educated. I've had my degree in finance and real estate. And they laughed at me. Oh, that's the highest educated cable puller we ever met. So I said, well, it's fine, because I want to know from the ground up and how this IT industry works. So that was my starting point. Fast forward about 10 years later, went through the different position in the company. I was the last position where I employed. I was the network consultant. So at that point, I call it the truly digital transformation, because I was one of the few engineers fortunate enough to work on the analog to digitizations to where we are today. So I was still in the analog world and then transform into the digital world, working with a lot of different network environments. Because networking, that was just kind of the starting at the point. So when I quit the company as a network consultant, I decided to have my IT company, which is now 24 years ago, starting in year 2000, and maintaining IT, helping companies to build the network and strengthen the network. And then, of course, network management. One part of network management is cybersecurity of what we know today. So that was the journey I started on about 18, 19 years ago. And I was helping one of the most luxurious brand hotel company. They are a global company, but they are not, they don't have hundreds of hotels, but it's just one of the most luxurious brand out there. So they look at it is not really from the way that we're looking at it, from how do we protect our data. They looking at it from how to protect their reputation, because their client is the who is who of the world. So that was when the starting point. They didn't really concern about the governance process. In fact, that we help them to find what are the governance standard that their cybersecurity program would comply to, so they can explain it to their auditor. So from a technical networking point of view, that's when we start embargo into our journey in vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, and then led into IT auditing and helping them as an advisor consulting role to address the compliance issues, the governance issues to their third-party auditor, because it is a publicly trading company. So during that period of time, from what we do as a technologist, that we have to set on the other side, which is the governance role, helping the internal team to explain what is needed in the technical side and justify to the management. And at the same time, we have to explain what we did from a technical point of view to the auditors to address the governance, risk, and compliance that they are concerning about. So it is two different type of path, but working in this global environment, now the line is very blurry. And in fact, that about 5-6 years ago, we start saying that the technology is already very mature in a lot of ways, from the IT to cybersecurity. But from the business point of view, at that point, including cyber insurance, is still fuzzy about what they really need as a company objective to drive the technology, to make it operational effective, and as well as cost efficient to address the GRC issues. So and there's a long introduction, but because a lot of, my audience, that when we talking to, it depends on what they're coming from. It could be business decision makers, it could be technologists, it could be governors. So sometimes that I have to be careful to define, what we call the acronym battle, which is like, you heard a lot of terminologies, but you don't really know what they mean until you break down into the details. And that is the landscape that we are working on at this point.
So you have developed a tool that sort of helps guide the process. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you. So because of that confusion, and to us, it's a lot to do with communication, the interpretations. So let me say from an example point of view, from a wealth management company, it could be a small company, 20, 30 people, but managing multi-million dollars of financial assets. So they might have to comply to the FINRA regulations, right? But they don't have a big IT and compliance team. So what they are looking at, it may be just the evaluations from the governance perspective. How well are they doing? So from that perspective, they may not need a lot of IT tools, but they need to have enough data to justify their actions, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So from that perspective, it's like, well, how do we translate all these technology, data sets that is being pulled from the different type of IT tools and explain to the stakeholder, the business owners, that why do where are they at in the cyber resilience maturity level to addressing this type of FINRA type of compliance and regulatory issues. So this is why that the confusion continues to happen. So we say, okay, you know what? It's easier to use picture to tell 1,000 words. So this is why we start doing the open source development. It's a cyber risk indicators. We call it Unity, is to unifying all those different data sets that is being bounced around within the organization, and then looking at from a vendor agnostic point of view, from an unbiased point of view, and share this to the community, and hoping the IT team or the security team or even the external vendor to use this type of tool to share what they find about the cyber resilience maturity for the business executives so they can translate that. Now, of course, we just start to doing that development last year. We're still going through the mock-up development page and to the prototyping. And that's one of the reasons why, we have a group and share that with the expertise, the subject matter expertise, and try to improve what are the correlations? How does a technology tool correlate into different type of regulatory issues? And again, to try to make it more operational effective and cost efficient for the business out there.
That's great. I really,
and that's just a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, it goes deep with what you're doing. But that's what I loved about what you're doing. It's different from a lot of the other products and services that are out there around cybersecurity. So what I wanted to do is have you like paint a picture for all those businesses that might be watching us right now. A lot of people think that this is a kind of conversation to be having with large corporations, and it's really not. So would you share the reason why it's not necessarily just a conversation for the big dogs?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is it. First of all, now, according to World Economic Forum, the cybersecurity outlook in 2024.
Yeah.
And they talked about the inequality between the organizations. Big company, they have the resource, especially in the banking sectors. It is heavily regulated, so they have to put a lot of money into the talent, the tool sets, and regulatory compliance to prepare for the regulators. And that's what we refer as the last line of defense, is legally defensible evidence and working with the lawyers, the team of lawyers to do that. So this is not who we speaking to, because they already have experts in-house and hiring the best of the best, right? And because they can afford it, simply say. Now, it goes into the small, mid-sized companies. This is where a lot of confusions, because one is the talent shortage in the last 5 years, or even longer than that. I look at the statistics in the United States is always, short about 500,000 expertise in cybersecurity. So that's just one element, is the talent shortage. And the other element, of course, is the increasing regulations and compliance. Sometimes that as a mom and pop shop, they gathering data for their marketing purposes, they didn't know that they actually get into some of the regulations requirements. For example, in California, where we are, in San Francisco, it's like, okay, California consumer privacy law now is going to be on the second versions. And a lot of mom and pop shop, they collecting, marketing, just want to do more business, but they didn't think of that's actually personal identifiable informations, the PII, that is underregulated by the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. So these are the areas that they might accidentally stumble on, but they would not know that they had a data breach or have crossed that line until they get fined by the regulators, because a lot of times they just continue to focus on their business. And that's the part that what we're trying to help and break down this complexity into what we refer in the CyberRisk Governance system as a sixth principle, which is how do you defend your cybersecurity data? How do you govern, governance? How do you recover? How do you do business continuity? How do you do risk mitigations? And how do you evaluate your assets? What kind of assets? So, this six principles, it's always in a circle that, okay, you can start with asset management, just knowing what are you collecting as the starting point. What are you collecting? Does it infringe any compliance and regulatory issues? And this is the part that I always love to say is that when I travel, right? When I go to a foreign country and foreign city, I don't know what kind of regulations that they have or don't have. I don't go in to study the laws before I go visit that location. And then I might get, get stopped by the policeman and say, hey, you did something bad. And in fact, I did. I'm not going to tell you what, but I did. And then the policeman came to me and say, I'm going to give you a citation because of what you have done. I said, what have I done? I have no idea what have I done. And then they asked me for the identity, so I give them a passport. Okay, because you're a foreigner, I'm going to let you off the hook this time. But now that you know, the next time if you do it again, I'm going to fine you because it's on the record now. Okay, thank you very much. But it's a similar type of case for a lot of small and mid-sized business. They started their business, they're thinking this is great. My idea is going to help me to make money, and they didn't look at the details because they might not have all the resource that they can afford to look into the details. So they start collecting this PII for their marketing purposes, like I said earlier. And then later on, they find out, oh my goodness, I got a data breach. Oh, now you have triggering into the CCPA. The regulator is going to come and look at and going to fine you. Yes, potentially you're going to get a big penalty out of that. But of course, a lot of cases, it goes back into the attorney general, which they're getting thousands of cases a year. Do you need necessary to do everything like the big corporation do? No, because the attorney general going to look at it. Okay, are you following some of the best practice based on your industry? And if you are, I'm going to let you off the hook because I know you don't have all the resources. But at the same time, if you don't try to even do some minimal defense, and framework and put it into your company, they might set you as an example to warn the other small businesses, to make sure then set you as an example, as a target. So these are the things that we try to work with our customers and basically say, look, we don't have to put all the tool sets into your environment. But these are some of the tool sets that you can get it at a very low cost or zero cost, depends on your IT team. For example, there are over 150 plus type of open source tools. And one of them we share with our audience is the OpenVAS, which is a vulnerability scanning tool. And as long as you do that, then it's demonstrating you try to do the best practice. You try to follow the best practice. Then, once you deploy this type of tool, then you look at this result that is coming back to see what are the area that you can improve. And if you can show that the business is making the effort to put all this evidence together to demonstrate to the regulators that you are improving year after year or quarter after quarter, they might leave you alone. So these are the part that how do you go back into the operational effectiveness, but at the same time, you got to watch your pocketbook and making sure you're justifying on all those actions.
I like that you brought up the risk mitigation part, because one of the things that I'm thinking of at the very beginning, because we work with a lot of innovators, and these are people at sort of the beginning part of building their business, and looking, forward thinking, and presenting themselves to investors who may have those questions about how resilient are you when these things may happen. And so investors may also see things that they don't see, the innovators themselves may not see in the long term. How would you, that would be the asset management, just looking at the data you're going to be collecting or that you already are, like the market research that you're talking about. But when you get a couple of years under your belt and you see what you're doing, then I think trying to set yourself up for mitigating any kind of risk, or maybe at least thinking in advance of what those tools or tasks may be. Certainly, we talked about before we came on the air that making sure that if you have any IT people that are going to be working with you, make sure that they're trained and continually trained. I don't know if there's any kind of certification in this space or not, but certainly to get the right people for your industry to be trained up. But we talked about insurance and that sort of thing. Can you share a little bit about all those sorts of things with our audience so that they know what kind of options they may have to look at?
So let's go back into like 5-6 years we were talking about the insurance part, which is interesting. It's like at that point, we call it the last line of defense, because after you get the data breach, if you get insurance, and you can help ask them to to recover some of the costs. But now the whole cyber insurance is upside down. So now it becomes the first line of defense. What we mean by that is, can you even buy the cyber insurance as a business owner, right? As a startup? Well, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, and we prepare a list of self-assessments on whether you can be potentially apply for cyber insurance, because all the cyber insurance, very simple example is like you have to have MFA, multi-factor authentications, right? So using your cell phone or besides password, a different type of authentications to prove your identity when you go log into an account. So everywhere is doing that now, but they're going to ask you, do you have that? But not just into your end users. Is your servers being protected? How do you protect it? How do you manage the password? What kind of solution do you manage your password for? You brought up an example, Mary, about employee. And of course, there are many of cases, disgruntled employees that San Francisco, years ago, that held, now our governor, Gavin Newsom, he was the mayor, and the network engineer in San Francisco actually hold hostage with his password, so San Francisco cannot transact the business, because one person has if I remember correctly, it's just that it's that network engineer has a different belief in how back then Mayor Gavin Newsom running the city, so he decided to hold the city hostage, and you can Google it and find all the details. So this could be just one simple thing. And of course, most of the employee, we have to trust them, but of course, trust but verify, or trust and verify. So this is go back into the basic business principle. Business continuity, it could be a part, and that's one of our 6 principles. And out of that, backup, data backup. Do you do backup? How often you do backup? Have you testing your backup? Not just against any disgruntled employee, but also, ransomware, which is happening all the time. And if you have backup, you might not need to pay that ransomware. Now, this is the kind of like, okay, from the last line of defense insurance, now jump into the first line of defense. And what are the criteria your company needs to meet to have that insurance? Now that you have the insurance, then it jumped to what is the last line of defense now? The last line of defense is how if your company has to comply to regulations,
Mhm.
what are the legally defensible evidence you have when you get a data breach? It's not if, it's when you're going to get a data breach, right? So this is the legally defensible you must have. And backup, same, functions, and it works on both ends. So this becomes a critical element, not because of the technology, but it's a necessity for the business, because
Mhm.
you need to minimize the impact. You need to minimize the risk before you even starting the business. And these are the criteria. I just had the similar conversations. For small businesses, yes, it might be, few thousand, tens of thousands of records. I just had this conversation with a startup. They already have 550 million data record for different purposes. And they are still a startup
Yeah.
because
Well, you
what
can figure
they're
those in health tech or whatever that are doing clinical trials
is for
and
insurance.
studies. Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it's for the insurance,
Yeah.
industry. I'm not going to jump into the details,
Yeah.
but it's still a startup. But they
Hmm.
have, of course, from a startup mode, they're not looking for a few $1 million to start with. They're looking for tens of $1 million to do their startup,
Hmm.
right? So that goes into a different depth, but same subject. It's
Hmm.
just that how deep do you need to go, do you need to go into? So one of the example, just go back into the business continuity, a backup. Okay, if it's company like that size, you need to have a robotic process automations, what the industry call RPA, acronyms, right? But okay, does a small company need that kind of automation processes to ensure they have the backup, not just on a weekly, a monthly or weekly basis? You're talking about maybe hourly basis, right? So these are the different processes based on the company objective, ties it back into the governance, risk, and compliance need to address, to prepare that technology side of execution.
We won't go into the laws that require the industry to cover themselves for all this, but there are some, right? You were telling me that the regulations with the GRC and everything, you have to be compliant with these things, but I don't know how many industries have them, but it seems like to me that they're going to need to get stronger as we move forward with some of this cybersecurity stuff. I wanted to address, like, the trouble with some of these breaches is that it's not the company itself, it's the third party, or it's some other entity that consults with that company that they didn't realize also consulted with another company that wasn't covered. And that has happened actually to somebody in my network, where it was not, the person that they were consulting with, it was somebody else that they had as a client that they were consulting with, that that was the gateway to the breach.
And you were the victim, Mary. It just
So
happened to you because you
yeah,
were one of the victim. But you, of
yeah,
course, in this point in time, it might be too early to say it's a third party or the supply chain risk, what we
yeah.
refer to.
Well, there you go. The supply chain of things that can happen. What can these companies do, and especially the ones that you can see far enough down the road, especially if they're startups, that this kind of thing is just waiting for you because you're going to
So
have to use several
so
parties
let
to
me
do what you're going to do.
give you a case studies,
Okay.
and it's the Target of 2013. So we know Target got hacked in 2013, but it wasn't how they get hacked. It wasn't directly related to their IT or security
Mhm.
infrastructure. It was through the contractor's contractor. One of the HVAC company got hacked, but they had access in the networking space,
Mhm.
and the hackers were able to go in from a small, the lowest denominator, the weakest link at that point,
Mhm.
which is the HVAC. And then they start exploiting the HVAC company. How do they do business? And what they didn't know the ultimate, the pot of gold was Target,
Well,
right? So they
target.
had to
They're just following it.
Eventually, yeah, they're just following what they can find. It's exactly what we're dealing with the phishing emails. Now everybody should know and be aware of, going back, tie it back into your security awareness educations. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
now we're training the end users how to identify what are the potential phishing email, and there are tools to do that. And basically give a grade to the employee, how
Yeah.
well they're doing on those trainings. So we deployed all of that. Now, that's where the supply chain is. You think about as the employee or
Mhm.
your subcontractor as a small business. We sub out some of the work to people around the world. Now it is almost as a must to survive in business, right?
Oh, yeah, these days.
Because of the lack of talent, the cost justifications, and also, the time zone difference. There's many reasons for outsourcing. So now from a business point of view, from a startup point of view, okay, now who are we outsourcing this to? How do we have control on what they do on a day-to-day basis?
Mhm.
One of the example that I'm not going to put associate to a name, is a platform that we use. We outsource some certain work, like for example, writing contents, as simple as having an intern. But we go through this platform because what they do is they screenshot every 10 minutes on what they do. Now, not necessarily for data breach or type of attack purposes. It was more for accounting purposes, to making sure when they send me the bill, the platform can verify they actually doing the work for my company, right? But that can be a screenshot. This is already have tools out there. So it can be applied for monitoring those vendors or those outsourced party. Are they doing the right thing? And then using AI nowadays to automations and making sure, to validate, to verify all those data, are they real or not real, right? That's another element of that. So now tie it back into your conversation about supply chain. This is another part why we partner with subject matter expertise. Not the SMB, but SME,
Yeah.
subject matter expertise in our language, in our world, because nobody knows it all. So this is where the part that we need to work with professionals, and then basically, of course, you just do it like another vendor management evaluation, due diligence process, to making sure that you interview that company and making sure that company has successful implementations. And we look at this third-party risk vendor assessment as part of our ecosystem partnership.
Okay.
Now, for the smaller business, they say, okay, we can afford, and I understand, we can afford to engage with a company that provide these type of consultants or putting executional plan. And this is where we work with our partner and break it into a fractional engagement. So we making sure that, okay, we break it into might be months, not, a year, maybe a 3 months, a 6 months. We actually go from a baseline evaluation first, what we call the security and risk assessment. So we
Yeah.
deploy technology tool to do some gap, analysis. Oh, we identify, you do have a third party risk. Okay. Now let's engage with a third-party risk assessor in this point of view, a supply chain risk assessor. And they come in, they may just ask some questions, look at the policies and procedures, if the company has it. If they don't, well, let's start with some basic policies and procedure first, right? And this policies and procedure might tie it into the HR team to making sure you have the confidentiality agreement with your subcontractor. How do you protect that? So these are the policies and procedure. And for the business owner, they can start to evaluate what are the baselines that they have, policies and procedures, and then engage with their either HR or different teams, including their IT if they outsource certain IT functions, which now we usually do. For example, the internet access, ISP. Nobody can afford to buy all the private lease lines. They have to go and lease it from ISPs, right? So they're going to buy internet bandwidth from internet service providers. Now that could be a part of the risk too, because your server, your internet, all this traffic is going through this ISP. What are they doing with it? You have no idea. They could be sitting in what we refer as a man-in-the-middle attack, collecting all your data, and you would have no idea what they're doing because you already signed a contract with them. You have trusted this partner, but have you verified they have all the confidentiality that meet your obligations to your regulator and compliance requirements? So this is the part you got to look at the contract, and this, it's a necessary. But if you are not, I'm not a lawyer, and I just have to go. Well, I use AT&T, or I use Verizon. I just have to trust them. Yes, that's the case. And the regulator said, okay, if they find out the bridge, the data bridge, it was coming from AT&T or Verizon, as a small business, we off the hook. But in the case of SolarWinds, which is in 2000, they supplied their software and hardware to the ISP, to the telecommunication provider. And because they get hacked, subsequently, at this point, they identify over 18,000 company is being affected by that one company a flaw, if you may. And now the CISO of SolarWinds, the ex-CISO of SolarWinds, is being sued personally by the SEC, Security Exchange Commission. So now it becomes a lot more challenging. Go back into the first line of defense. How do you even buy cyber insurance? And the last line of defense, how do you prove that it is not my fault in a sense?
There you go. Well, you just said it as simply as you could say it. How do you prove it's not my fault? I wanted to, Lord, I had a whole list of questions. I think we got through half of them, but so we might have to do a part two. Because I think it is the more that this impacts other people, and you see it more often than not these days. I mean, in my little community, I was at a Rotary Club not long ago, and the hands went up of people who have been impacted by some form of cyber attack, whether it was a phishing, email or whatever that got them. But half the room uses the same hospital and people that we use. So I mean, they all got the same letter that I did. But I wanted to ask from a standpoint of communities and larger organizations and NGOs and nonprofits and those weird animals that are out there. And you said something I was actually going to ask. I'm not sure where some of these startups might not know where they go to find out what their regulations are, for their industry. Is there a one-stop shop for anything like that, or where would you direct them?
Unfortunately, there isn't. And this is why I go back into the early point, the confusions and the complexity of it drives lots of miscommunications.
Yeah.
And because of miscommunications, that's where money being wasted in a way, right? But unfortunately, on the other hand of it, there are a lot of governments, documentations, government institutes that basically do a lot of this type of research. Where we go, starting off, is NIST, National Institute of Standards of Technologies. NIST, special publications 800, or NIST CSF, which stands for Cybersecurity Framework. And the way that we look at it you mentioned about the different type of regulations. The way that we're looking at it, there's a global, regional, local, and industrial. Okay.
Yeah.
So global is like the NIST, ISO, those are the kind of like global standards. Okay. Then it goes into the regional. For example, United States, if you sell anything to the Department of Defense, then you must heard of CMMC. Cybersecurity maturity module certificate, and they break it down into 5 different levels. And CMMC 1, and I use that as an example. Even though if you sell socks to the Department of Defense for our military,
Yeah.
You still have to comply for the CMMC level 1, but it could be, is a self-attestation. You just need to follow the framework, what they're recommending, and do your checklist and making sure that you have legally defensible document to back up what you check off. Don't just say, okay, I'm all compliant. They might randomly check, or unfortunately, when the data breach happen, if you don't have those legally defensible evidence, then that will be in big trouble, right? Because now not only you didn't comply to the certificate, now you're lying to your potential buyer. So that's a big, consequences of that. Now, then it goes into the local level, like an example I talked about, California Consumer Privacy Act, right? And again, do you know what you need? It's something that you have to do, research or talk to lawyers or consultants. And then the industrial level, that's another maybe easier one for your startup. It's like, okay, I'm gonna be putting a payment card terminal, like the square that we see. Okay, so you should know there is a payment card industry, that there is a PCI DSS that you have to comply. So then that is another layer. That's why we talk about those 4 layers, depends on what you do, what kind
Yeah.
of business you are in, where you're going to do your business, and who are you selling it to? These are the 3 basic questions, and go back into the 5 W's, right? So, and then when do you need to comply? Smaller company as a startup, you might not need to do that. But when you're getting to the point that you start selling your product and your customer, which some of our customers has a demand from their customers, if you don't meet all these compliance tasks, okay, not certificate, but task, we're not going to do business with you. So then we can go and help our customers, not just looking at the task of what they asking them to do, but now we have to provide legally defensible evidence to justify every single task that we have on that list. And we have to go through their potential buyer to making sure, okay, are we addressing, just like the auditor, right? Are we addressing your need? They say, okay, I got all the evidence you need. Well, but maybe there's one other evidence, for example, that goes back into the HR. Some of them they did ask for, okay, how do you train your employee? How do you track these employees actually taking these classes that we are looking for? So you got to have a sign-up sheet, right? You got to have a sign-up sheet. You got to have a signature.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the evidence that they are looking into now.
Wow, really minute details of things. But interesting, because you brought up the training of the IT department. It's really important that they know what to look for, because that's one of the things that we were talking about before we went on record, is the fact that you wonder why it takes so long for some of the IT departments to figure out or that there's a red flag there. Well, maybe they don't see the red flag because they don't know what red flag to look for. Because honestly, cybersecurity is moving so crazy fast. And you just shared that person that got through the back door into the HVAC system just ended up at Target. Who would have seen maybe that even happening? It's just a tricky little thing. So having somebody that's trained to look for the right things is important. So really, whether it's municipalities or nonprofits, or it really doesn't matter. It matters who your end user is and who you are selling services or putting out, services or gathering data from, right? So it could be membership data, but it's still, you're taking credit cards from somebody for something, for donations or memberships for sure. So let's do a little quick checklist of what Netswitch has in its umbrella of services to help. So to auditing of what's going on with a company, right? So take it from there.
Yeah. So we usually 3 simple steps we try to boil down to.
Okay.
Know your unknown, right? So just even the regulatory issues, what type of technology. Do you know what kinds of gaps that you have? Most of the company we dealt with, they don't. They know certain portion of it, but they don't know the rest of it. So we got to approach it from a holistic point. So known the unknown is step 1. How we engage, what I called the security and risk assessment is the first step, right? And what we call the baseline. That's the first step. Second step is the building blocks. So we just talk about a lot of different building blocks, security training. How do you continue monitoring? If it's necessary to continue monitoring, what kind of KPI the company wants to define, the key performance index, to measure the success of cyber resilient maturity. That's what we call the professional development. And we work with their internal team and the external vendor to put all these building blocks so the company owner doesn't waste their money. So, okay, how do we enhance it? How do we improve it? The third step is continuous measure and monitoring. So this is the part that, okay, after we KPI identify, what we call the roadmap being identified. We are done. Netswitch is out of there. Now the company basically, so okay, now we got our KPI defined. Can they continuously measure and monitor? And then the next year they might come back and say, hey, Netswitch, we have done enough improvement. Now let's go back and look at what we have done better than last year. What are the future, what are the identifiable gap? And this is kind of like a, stop and go process, unfortunately. And if you engage with a big company like the Big Four, of course they want to do it all and charge you a lot of money. But we know small company, it has to be progressive. And that is where we say that, okay, we don't want to sell you more than you need, because otherwise we create no value. And in fact, that becomes a bad reputation on our part. So we want to make sure that, okay, you digest what you have. And starting with, what do you have right now? How is what you have internally addressing your last line of defense? Let's start with that. Let's just have a conversation. And a lot of times that, we engage with the team, oh yeah, I think that we are 70% ready. But when we peel, just like the mechanic, let me open up the hood and let me do a test run. Oh, you actually have this problem, that problem. Well, because they are not trained to look for
They're not
those
seeing
problems.
it. Yeah, the perspective not in line. Yeah, I see that. So, yeah, so you have the ability to help them kind of look through the weeds, see where there's going to be some trigger points that are going to be some problems, and help them figure out how to fix those problems so that they are not only cyber secure, but compliant at the same time, and make it easier for both processes to marry up and gel. And
Right.
work
That's
out
why we call it CyberRisk Governance. Is the
governance.
now?
Yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah,
the CRG. So
the
CRG is a
the CRT.
strategy.
I like
Yeah,
that.
the CRG strategy, and then going
Yeah,
into the SARA step-by-step approach, and
yeah.
making sure that our client is learning in that progressive approach. They identify what they need, where they need help, and then start
Yes.
preparing the budget. And when they have time for the budget, after they prepare, then they can go back into our
Okay.
roadmap and say, oh, now we can implement this. They not
Yeah.
necessarily need us at that point. They might already improve because they already raised their
Yeah.
awareness. They can identify there are plenty of tools out there. Maybe their
Mhm.
IT team is savvy enough to use some of the open source to, and we've been using open source for the last 18 years, once we started in
Yeah.
cybersecurity, because there's a lot of tool you only need it for a short period of time, like the
Mhm.
vulnerability assessment. You don't have to constantly run it. So buying that type of tool, unless you PCI DSS that you require to have this ASV
Yeah.
vendor,
Yeah.
then otherwise you can just do it on a quarterly basis. And then why buy the tool? Just like
Yeah.
why you want to buy a car. I live in the city. I don't need to buy a car. I could choose public transportation, but occasionally I need to rent a car. So this is the part that you can look at it from a strategic point of view. How do you adapt into what is available in the environment, train your personnel, and learn that
Mhm.
progressive approach, and moving from a reactive, passive to proactive to adaptive
Mhm.
strategy.
This is a peace of mind exercise. This is,
Absolutely,
it
absolutely.
totally
At the end of the
is.
day, the last line of defense is legally defensible evidence. So
Yeah.
if your business requires it, then yes, you want to sleep better
Yeah.
at night to knowing that you have those evidence to back up
Yeah.
all the efforts
Exactly.
and all the money that you have spent on not just growing your business, but also into protecting yourself to make sure you get a better night's sleep.
Yeah, you brought it up, but I know I had one client one time that was talking about this whole thing in regards to doing some business in the UK, and they had just passed the GDPR or whatever it was, and his partner in it said, "This is what keeps me up at night. I can't sleep because of this." And because their platform was collecting data, and she knew it, and she said, "This is what's keeping me up at night." So you're right, it is, and it is. It's a piece of my exercise. So at the end of an interview, I always like to ask, who do you think you need to meet to help you grow what you're doing? So have that question, but also, is there anything that you would like to ask of people who might be watching? I know that you have, you do webinars, you put out a news release, so I'm sure there's a sign up, not a news release, a newsletter that people could probably sign up on your website. And which, by the way, please do that. It's most informative. I love it. It comes out, every couple of weeks or so. And it tells you, really what's going on out there, kind of gives you a snapshot of what kind of cyber attacks are going on out there. And even those people who've claimed credit for doing them, who they are and where they're coming from. But it gives you a sense of how large and how small these things can be, and what the expectation of the outcomes kind of more or less are. So, and then at the end of it, I think, you and your partner at Netswitch, you give, kind of your perspective on what should happen. So, so that in itself is worth going to the website and signing up for. But I think you also indicate webinars when you're bringing them up on that email. But is there anything else upcoming that you want to share with people, and then tell us who you think you'd like to meet to move forward?
So we love to talk to expert like yourself, consulting firms. We work with global consulting firm or individual, because you are our prospect. Let's put it this way: the general community out there, you are their trusted advisor. So you become the expert, just like I keep saying, I laugh, it's like a lot of people say, oh, IT, well, I got my 12-year-old computer geek, next door, or my nephew, which is fine, because they do offer their expertise. But,
Yeah.
it's only when we're talking with consultant like you, then we have a broader and more holistic view. Then we break down the pieces to help our community. And I shared this exact same messages around the world, in different part of the world, in Asia, Europe, and now Latin America as well, to share our messages across the world, from educational institute all the way to larger companies, from the consulting, through the consulting, our trusted partner as well. And because again, it's go back into that trust. So we just want to elevate the connaissance, the awareness and knowledge at this point. So this is who we like to meet, talk with the expertise in the field, because they already trusted by their network of people. Now, that's the one part. The other part, we actually working together, like what you and I doing, sharing this message to the general public, to everybody who are willing to listen and making the changes, in taking the step, knowing the unknown, do their building block, and not necessarily through consultants. They can do that on their own. And there are lots of resources if they do, going to the third part on the resources. Besides Googling, and now AI help you to come up with this type of terminology, or looking to different type of technologies and processes, where we asking our community to come to listen, to share the insight, is on the LinkedIn. And if you look into LinkedIn, CyberRisk Governance Group, that's what me and Sean Mahoney have built in the last year and a half. And now it's got to about 4,300 members. And these members are actually come from our industry. And they share their insights to our community, whoever wants to listen, and then we can help them to address some of those questions that they have. That's the first part. So sign up into our group. And then the second part, like you said, there's newsletter. We do podcasts and we do live webinar, and now we are preparing lessons 30 minutes lessons with expert, like different type of expert, to talk about one of the, Mary, we talk about like business impact analysis. People might heard of that term, but how do they actually utilize business impact analysis to start knowing the unknown? Or we sharing white papers, self-assessment tools for them just to engage with their existing team about those approaches, the tactics. Not necessarily they have to spend any money. Just do a brown bag lunch and then just look at those questions. Have we done that? Where are we with that? Like the MFA we touch on. Well, do we get everybody MFA, or is it just the group of people that have MFA? And I tell you, usually is the C-level. They don't engage with them, multi-factor authentication, because it's too inconvenient. But now that reason is no longer valid. It's a necessity for insurance. It's a necessity for evidence that you have engaged. And if the C-level do not, because it's inconvenient for me, I don't want to, go into my, cell phone to approve my access into the web portal. I'm sorry, this is a must nowadays. You can no longer have any other reasons not to turn that on as part of the features in most of the cloud platform anyway. So these are the areas that they can look into, the large amount of resources that's out in the public space, including our webinars, including our information sharings, the insights, that they can inspire. Hopefully they can inspire from that, asking the similar type of question to the internal resource and the external vendors. Because we have went into that IT vendor, that age myself too. We call them system integrators, right? And then it becomes the managed service provider. Now, a lot of managed service provider wants to become managed security service providers. But again, these are the area we need to work together. The problem is too huge for any one segment of the business to tackle. So that's why we want to share our knowledge and our insights into the community, and hopefully that it will help on decreasing the cybercrime that we talked about.
You're wonderful. Thank you.
Just doing my piece, my small, tiny piece.
You and like I say, Sean does a terrific job with the newsletter. It's something that I look at every time it comes. So thank you both. I want to hang in there with me for a second. I'm just going to say, everybody else, please go to their website. Say it for us, Stanley. Your website.
Netswitch.net.
Okay.
Netswitch.net. And as I said, go start with the LinkedIn CyberRisk Governance group. Do a search.
There you go.
Our website, netswitch.net.
Okay. And if you can't remember that, then you go to frontrunnersinnovate.com and you will get this podcast, and you'll be able to have that information there with it, so that you can jump right over to where he just said. So this is great. We loved having you, and this is important information. Please pay attention to it. Please get the newsletter. Please go and join the group and see what's being said. This is important for your business and important for the community at large out there, because this is a worldwide situation, just like the pandemic. This is a worldwide situation. This is not just US based. So,
and it's only 3 steps, just 3 simple steps.
Yeah, there you go. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Stanley. And until next time.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Pleasure.